It was one of those late autumn nights when the air feels damp, clinging to your skin like an invisible film. Emma sat at the bus stop alone, hugging her coat tighter around her shoulders. The glow of the street lamp above flickered every so often, humming like an old refrigerator about to break down. She had missed the earlier bus after working overtime at her bookstore job, and now she was waiting for the last route of the night, the infamous 11:45 p.m. bus. Her coworkers always joked about it, calling it the ghost bus because almost no one took it, and those who did never seemed to ride it more than once. Emma used to laugh at that, dismissing it as just another urban legend. Tonight, though, she wasn't laughing. The street was eerily quiet. When the bus finally arrived, its headlights cut through the fog like two pale eyes. The vehicle lumbered toward her with a groan, as though reluctant to keep going. Emma climbed on board, scanning the dimly lit interior. The driver didn't greet her. He just stared forward, his face half hidden in shadow beneath the brim of his cap. Emma slid into a seat halfway down the aisle. She noticed right away how cold it was inside. The heater didn't seem to be running, and the windows were covered in condensation, like the breath of something unseen. She tried to shake off the feeling, convincing herself that all buses felt this way late at night. There were only 3 other passengers. A woman sat near the back, her head tilted toward the window as though she were asleep, though Emma never saw her chest rise with breath. A man in a dark coat sat 2 rows ahead, his hands folded stiffly in his lap, staring straight ahead without blinking. The last passenger was a boy, maybe 16, clutching an old backpack tightly to his chest. He glanced at Emma once, his wide eyes shimmering with something close to fear, before quickly looking away. The silence among them was oppressive. No one shifted in their seat. No one coughed. No one made the usual small noises of life. It felt like sitting among statues. The bus rumbled through the deserted streets, passing dark storefronts and houses with their windows shut tight. Every so often, Emma caught her own reflection in the fogged glass, pale and ghostly, as if she didn't belong in the world outside. The driver never stopped for red lights, and yet no cars appeared on the road to challenge him. When Emma finally glanced at the glowing digital clock above the driver's seat, her chest tightened. It still read 11:45. She frowned, telling herself maybe the clock was broken. But when she checked her phone, the screen blinked the same time back at her, 11:45. A prickling chill crawled up her spine. Emma leaned forward, her voice tentative. "Excuse me, do you know when the next stop is?" she asked the driver. He didn't respond. His head tilted slightly, as though he had heard, but his hands never left the wheel. She glanced at the boy clutching his backpack, hoping for some normalcy. He whispered, almost too low to hear, "You shouldn't be on this bus." Before Emma could reply, the bus shuddered violently, plunging into a stretch of road lined with tall, leafless trees. The world outside the windows grew darker still, until it looked less like night and more like the edge of nothingness. Emma's hand tightened around the seat in front of her, heart pounding with the realization. She wasn't on the bus she thought she'd boarded. The truck rumbled forward, its engine sounding too loud in the oppressive silence, as though the noise might wake something slumbering in the woods. Daniel kept glancing at the tree line, certain he would catch a glimpse of movement if he looked long enough. And then, just past the next turn, he did. For only a second, in the corner of his headlights, he saw a figure dart between the trees. It wasn't the way a deer would move. It wasn't even the fluid sprint of a person. The motion was jerky, broken, as if its limbs bent in ways they shouldn't. He swallowed hard and pressed the gas a little heavier. The forest thickened around him, the branches above locking into a tangled ceiling that choked out the already faint moonlight. Daniel knew the road well, but for the first time, he doubted his bearings. He reached to the passenger seat for his phone, thinking he could at least check the time, maybe pull up GPS for reassurance. But the phone was dead. Not just low battery dead, completely unresponsive, though he was sure he'd charged it during his shift. A cold bead of sweat slid down his temple as the realization set in. Whatever was happening wasn't a simple string of coincidences. Something was interfering. The radio erupted again, sudden and sharp. Not static this time, but faint music, old, warbling, like it came from a broken record player. The tune was unfamiliar, though it carried an eerie, carnival-like melody. Daniel's chest tightened as the volume rose on its own, filling the cab with the crackling, distorted song. He hit the power button again, but the music only grew louder until a voice bled through it. "You shouldn't be here." The words were muffled, stretched, but unmistakable. Daniel's knuckles ached from how hard he gripped the wheel. He nearly veered off the road before the radio cut off with a sudden click. Ahead, the road split into a fork Daniel had never seen before. He slowed the truck, squinting into the darkness, trying to recall if the county had added new routes. But he knew this road. He'd driven it dozens of times. There had never been a fork. One path curved sharply left, sinking into a tunnel of shadow. The other veered right, lined by towering pines that swayed as if stirred by a wind he couldn't feel. His gut screamed at him to turn back, but the narrowness of the road made reversing dangerous. He had to choose. Daniel took the right fork. As he did, the trees seemed to lean closer, branches scratching faintly along the side of the truck. He forced himself to keep his eyes forward, though every instinct begged him to glance at the rearview mirror. He didn't want to see what might be following him. Then came the smell. A foul, sour stench, like wet earth mixed with something rotting, wafted through the vents. His stomach lurched, and before he could close the vents, something scraped hard against the truck's undercarriage, a dragging, metallic screech that made his skin crawl. Whatever it wasn't in the trees anymore. It was underneath him. The screech beneath the truck faded into a low, dragging hum, vibrating through the floorboards. Daniel's stomach twisted, and he lifted his feet instinctively, as though something might reach through the steel and grab his ankles. Every mile, the sound grew heavier, like iron chains grinding along pavement. He dared a glance at the side mirrors, hoping for some rational explanation, maybe a loose pipe or a broken muffler. But the mirrors reflected only the darkness swallowing the road behind him, broken occasionally by trees that seemed to lean closer with each pass. His pulse thudded in his ears. He wasn't alone on this road anymore. A sharp thud echoed from under the cab, so loud Daniel jumped in his seat. The steering wheel jerked, and the truck veered right, tires spitting gravel as he fought to regain control. Something had slammed against the floor from beneath, deliberate and heavy, as if trying to break through. Daniel's throat tightened. The thing wasn't just clinging to the truck, it wanted in. He pressed the accelerator, the truck rattling with protest as speed climbed, but the weight dragging below never loosened. If anything, it seemed to be climbing. The headlights flickered again, and in that strobe of artificial daylight, Daniel caught sight of something in the ditch just ahead. A figure. No, not just a figure. It was the same tall, limp thing he'd seen standing in the road earlier, its head bent, arms dangling. For a moment, it seemed to lurch forward, like it was about to step out again. Daniel swerved violently, his tires shrieking against the pavement. He missed it, but when he checked the road behind, there was nothing in the ditch. Nothing at all. Yet the sound under his truck shifted, scraping harder, now accompanied by faint knocks, rhythmic, almost like footsteps. Panic boiled in Daniel's chest, and he fumbled for the glove compartment, yanking it open with one hand while trying to steady the wheel with the other. Inside, buried under old diner receipts and a cracked flashlight, was the small crowbar he kept for emergencies. He snatched it up, gripping the cold metal so tight his knuckles burned. What was he going to do? Hang out the window and take a swing at whatever clung beneath him? Still, just having it in his lap made him feel less powerless. The radio sparked again, and this time, the whispering voice was clearer. "He's already inside." Daniel froze, every muscle locking as his eyes darted to the rearview mirror. At first, it showed nothing but the empty cab behind him, dark seats faintly lit by the dashboard glow. But then, the shape shifted. A shadow darker than the night pulled across the back seat, forming a silhouette that hadn't been there seconds ago. It sat still, impossibly still, as though waiting. Daniel's chest tightened, breath shallow, the crowbar trembling in his hands. The thing wasn't just under the truck anymore. Somehow, impossibly, it had made its way inside. Daniel's grip tightened on the crowbar, his knuckles pale in the weak dashboard glow. He didn't dare move. The shadow in the rearview mirror was wrong, too solid to be a trick of the light, yet too dark to have any real form. It sat in the center of the back seat, head bowed like the figure he'd seen in the road. His breath fogged faintly against the cold windshield, and for a fleeting second, He thought he saw the fog mirrored in the glass behind him, as if something in the back seat was breathing too. "Get out," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. The cab swallowed the words, leaving only the faint rattle of the truck's old engine. He forced his eyes away from the mirror, telling himself it wasn't real, that he'd been awake too long, that stress was playing tricks on him. But the smell, that sour, rotting stench, was stronger now, filling the air vents, clinging to the upholstery. He cracked the window, gasping for fresh air, but the cold night only dragged the odor deeper inside, as if inviting whatever was back there to settle. In the first sound was a shift of fabric. Subtle, soft, the creak of old vinyl seats under weight that wasn't his. Daniel's chest heaved as he kept his eyes locked on the road, knuckles white, crowbar trembling against his leg. "Not real," he muttered. "Not real, not real, not real." But then came the second sound, closer, undeniable. A long, deliberate inhale, wet and ragged, like lungs straining through water. The noise filled the small cab, vibrating in his bones. He snapped his gaze to the rear view again. The shape was still there. Only now, its head was no longer bowed. The shadow's face, or what passed for one, was still obscured, a blur darker than the cab around it. But Daniel could feel it watching him. The truck shuddered as the road curved sharply, gravel spraying from the tires, but he didn't slow. His heart slammed against his ribs as he raised the crowbar in one shaking hand, pointing it toward the mirror, as though warning it. For a moment, silence fell. Just him, the road, the hum of the engine. And then, in a voice that scraped like rusted metal, the figure spoke. "You should have taken the other road," Daniel screamed, twisting in his seat and swinging the crowbar backward with every ounce of strength. The blow passed through empty air, slamming into the truck's headrest with a dull thunk. The back seat was vacant, shadows exactly where they should be. Panting, sweat slicking his forehead, Daniel whipped his gaze between the road and the mirror. Nothing, but the smell lingered. Worse now, clawing at his throat. His chest tightened as the truck's headlights caught something far worse ahead. A lone figure, standing dead center in the middle of the road. The figure ahead didn't move as the truck barreled closer. Its arms hung limp at its sides, head lowered just enough that its face was swallowed by shadow. Daniel's foot hovered over the brake, then slammed it down hard, the truck shrieking as tires skidded against asphalt. The pickup stopped just short of the figure. The headlights cut a harsh cone of light across its body. It didn't flinch, didn't even sway in the wind. It simply stood, blocking the road like a scarecrow planted in the middle of nowhere. Daniel's chest heaved as he gripped the wheel. For a moment, neither he nor the figure moved, locked in some silent standoff. Then, slowly, impossibly slow, the figure lifted its head. What Daniel saw made his stomach twist. The face was wrong. Not mangled, not monstrous, just absent. Where eyes and a mouth should have been was only smooth, featureless skin, as pale as bone in the headlights. The air in the cab thickened with that sour, rotting stench, and Daniel gagged, one hand fumbling for the gear shift. He had two choices: go back or go through. He slammed the truck into reverse. The engine roared, gears grinding in protest as the tires spun against loose gravel. But in the mirrors, Daniel froze. The figure was there too, behind him, identical, standing dead center in the middle of the road, backlit by his own taillights. Two roads, two figures, no escape. His chest seized as panic clawed through him. He had no rational explanation left. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't imagination. Something was playing with him, hurting him. The radio exploded with static again, louder than ever, filling the cab with violent hissing. Underneath it, layered and distorted, came voices, many of them. Dozens. They whispered over one another, overlapping, a garbled chorus of words Daniel couldn't quite understand. He covered his ears, crowbar pressed against his chest like a shield. Then, through the chaos, one voice rose above the rest. Clear. Cold. Choose. Daniel's vision blurred as he slammed the truck into drive and floored the accelerator. The pickup roared forward, closing the distance with the faceless figure in seconds. His body braced for impact, crowbar clattering to the floorboards. But the moment the truck should have struck, the figure dissolved into smoke, vanishing into the night air. Relief surged in his chest, until he realized the smoke hadn't dissipated. It had poured through the truck's vents, filling the cab, curling around his throat and eyes. Daniel coughed violently, swerving on the road, as something whispered from the passenger seat beside him. Daniel's lungs burned as the smoke swirled through the cab, thick and acrid, sinking into his clothes, his skin, his throat. He coughed so hard the steering wheel slipped beneath his hands, the truck weaving dangerously close to the ditch. His eyes watered, vision splitting, doubling the road ahead. Through the haze, headlights cut only a few feet forward, but the shadows on the trees seemed to multiply, growing taller, bending closer. His chest felt tight, like the smoke wasn't just choking him. It was crawling inside him. With one desperate motion, he cranked down the driver's window, letting cold night air slice through the cab. The wind pulled at the smoke, but it didn't leave. Instead, it curled against the passenger seat, coiling into a vague, human-like shape. Daniel blinked through tears. The thing was sitting there, head tilted toward him, body shifting like mist caught in invisible currents. And then, with a sharp twist of its fog-like form, it leaned closer. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "You're already mine." Daniel swung the crowbar, the metal cutting straight through the passenger seat, slamming against the door with a deafening clang. The smoke exploded, scattering into dozens of whirling tendrils that whipped through the cab like living snakes. They struck his arms, his chest, his neck, cold, wet, sinking into his skin. Daniel screamed, dropping the crowbar, clawing at himself as black streaks spread across his hands where the tendrils touched. His veins bulged dark, as if the smoke were filling him from the inside out. His vision flickered. One moment, he was in the truck. The next, he wasn't. He stood outside in the middle of the road, under the tall trees, the night pressing in on all sides. No headlights, no engine, just silence. The work boot lay in front of him again, the same one he'd seen at the start of the drive. He bent down instinctively to pick it up and froze. It was warm, wet. Fresh blood seeped from inside, dripping between his fingers. His stomach lurched, and when he looked up, there were dozens of boots scattered across the asphalt, all leaking the same dark fluid. The violent jolt snapped him back into the cab. His head cracked against the window, and his eyes flew open. He was still driving, truck veering wildly across the road, tires screeching. His hands clawed the wheel, trying to regain control. The smoke had vanished, but the black streaks remained, etched deep in his skin, crawling toward his shoulders like living veins. His chest heaved, heart hammering, when he realized the worst part. The passenger seat wasn't empty anymore. Someone was sitting there. Not smoke, not shadow, flesh and bone. Daniel's knuckles whitened on the wheel as he dared to glance again at the passenger seat. His stomach dropped. No smoke, no shadow. A person sat there, or something that wore the shape of one. Its body was lanky, bones stretching too far beneath damp, gray flesh that clung like wax. The thing leaned against the seat casually, as though it belonged there, one arm propped against the door. Its head turned slowly toward him, and Daniel wished it hadn't. Its face looked like it had been pulled from several others and stitched together wrong. A mouth that was too wide, eyes too deep, skin stretched too thin, quivering where it met the bone. Daniel's breathing quickened, the black veins crawling further up his neck, tightening like a noose. His crowbar was still at his feet, but the thought of reaching down, of breaking eye contact, froze him. The thing's smile widened. Not naturally, not like skin moving over muscle, but like fabric tearing to make room. The mouth dragged toward its ear, exposing teeth that looked more like shards of broken glass than bone. "Drive," it rasped, voice wet and guttural, vibrating through the cab. "We're not there yet." His first instinct was to slam the brakes, throw himself out of the truck, and run into the woods. But even as the thought formed, the forest outside seemed to lean closer, branches like claws scratching against the cab, as if waiting for him to make that choice. The road beneath the headlights looked narrower than before, edges crumbling into shadow. Daniel's pulse thundered. He pressed harder on the accelerator. If he stopped, he knew he wouldn't start again. If he left the truck, the trees would take him. He was trapped in motion. The figure's head twitched toward him, neck cracking as it studied his face. Its eyes, 2 pits deeper than they had any right to be, seemed to drink him in. He could feel it rooting through his thoughts, peeling them back one by one. Its voice slithered into the space between his ears. "Do you know how many roads end here? How many stay? Daniel's throat went dry. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask what it wanted, but no sound came out. The thing chuckled, a noise like a wet cough, before leaning closer. "You're already on the wrong one." The cab grew colder. Frost spread across the inside of the windshield in thin, jagged lines, the glass groaning under the pressure. Daniel's breath came out in clouds, trembling in the green glow of the dashboard. He forced his eyes to the road, but the pavement was changing. The yellow lines twisted like snakes, doubling back on themselves, leading into darkness that no headlights could reach. In the passenger seat, the thing's hand twitched, then stretched, fingers impossibly long, joints bending backward as it reached toward his arm. Daniel's every nerve screamed to move, to do something. Daniel's hands were slick with blood from the shattered glass, his knuckles raw as he clutched the tire iron. His pulse thundered so violently it felt like his whole body was vibrating. The screech in the fog grew louder, sharper, until it seemed to rattle the very frame of the car. He slammed the accelerator down. The tires screamed, and the vehicle shot forward, bouncing over cracks and debris. In the mirror, faint shapes emerged, more than one. Pale limbs flailing, elongated bodies crawling over each other in the fog, all sprinting after him with impossible speed. The forest blurred at the edges of his vision, the trees now bending unnaturally, their shapes warping like shadows painted on liquid. The road didn't feel like a road anymore. The white lines shimmered, bending and twisting, sometimes vanishing altogether. Daniel tried to focus, to keep control, but it was as if the asphalt itself were alive, stretching and contorting to keep him trapped. Every time he thought he'd gained distance, the fog ahead thickened, and the shapes reappeared, closer than before. That a pale hand slammed against the driver's side window, fingers dragging bloody streaks across the glass. Daniel swerved, the car jolting dangerously close to the edge of the broken road. Another figure lunged from the treeline, slamming onto the hood. It clung there, head pressed to the windshield, its faceless surface inches from his terrified eyes. Daniel roared and smashed the tire iron against the glass from inside. The creature didn't flinch. Instead, it began to peel its long body upward, crawling over the roof, dragging nails across metal with a scream that split the night. The road tilted downhill suddenly, the car gaining terrifying speed as gravity joined the chase. Daniel wrestled the wheel, eyes straining against the blur. The forest gave way to black emptiness on either side. No trees, no ground, just a void swallowing the edges of the asphalt. It was like the world had fallen away, leaving only him, the car, and the things hunting him. He gritted his teeth, flooring the pedal until the speedometer quivered past 100. The engine howled, metal rattling like it might tear apart at any second. Behind him, the screeches blended into one rising, monstrous wail. The sound was so loud it seemed to come from inside his skull, vibrating his bones. He risked one glance in the mirror and froze. They weren't just chasing him anymore. Dozens of them were there, faceless bodies sprinting on all fours, their limbs bending like broken marionettes. And at the center of them, rising taller than the rest, was something far worse, something towering, skeletal, its face a smooth oval that stretched too wide, glowing faintly in the fog. Daniel's breath hitched as realization tore through him. This wasn't just one creature. It was a legion. The front tires hung over the abyss, the truck rocking as gravel tumbled into the dark. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He slammed the gear into reverse, flooring the pedal, but the wheels only spun, screeching uselessly against the edge. Smoke billowed from the hood, filling the air with the stench of burning oil. The figure in the passenger seat leaned forward, its jagged smile spreading wider, as if it were savoring his panic. "Down," it whispered, voice cracking in multiple directions at once. "That's where the road ends." Daniel gritted his teeth, adrenaline flooding his veins. With one hand on the wheel and the other gripping the crowbar, he slammed his foot against the accelerator. The truck roared, jolting backward, tires finally catching grip. For a moment, relief surged through him, until the road behind was gone. Where there had once been cracked asphalt, there was now only more blackness, the fissure widening in both directions. He wasn't reversing away from the edge. He was trapped on an island of crumbling pavement, suspended in a void that had no bottom. The cab trembled, doors rattling in their frames. Frost on the windshield spread faster, splintering into sharp, crystalline veins. Daniel gasped for breath as the veins in his own skin pulsed with the same black glow, syncing with the cracks spreading across the glass. His arms shook violently, crowbars slipping from his grip, clattering to the floorboards. The figure beside him didn't move. It only tilted its head, as though waiting, eyes sinking deeper, darker, until they looked less like eyes and more like holes punched straight through the world. Daniel lunged for the crowbar, fingers brushing cold steel just as the figure moved. Its arm jerked out, bones popping, fingers lengthening into spindly claws. They wrapped around his wrist, squeezing with impossible strength. His skin burned where it touched him, black veins racing up his arm like wildfire. Daniel screamed, yanking against it, but the figure only leaned closer, its too wide mouth opening until its jaw cracked. The sound was wet and violent. Inside, its throat glowed faintly, as though something alive writhed beneath the surface. Almost there, it hissed, a voice and a vibration crawling through his skull. The pavement beneath the truck groaned, splitting further. The hood tipped forward, headlights swinging down into the abyss. Daniel's stomach lurched as the whole vehicle began to slide. He roared, pulling the crowbar free, and with one last surge of fear and rage, swung it into the figure's face. The blow landed with a sickening crunch, but instead of flesh, the crowbar struck something brittle, like glass. The figure's head cracked, splintering into jagged lines that glowed faintly red beneath the surface. Its smile didn't fade. If anything, it grew. And then, with a sound like shattering ice, the truck plunged forward into the dark. The truck plunged nose first into the abyss. Daniel's scream was swallowed instantly by the void, his body pressed against the seat as gravity tore the vehicle downward. The headlights became useless beams slicing through black nothing, revealing only more of the same endless fall. The figure sat calmly in the passenger seat, its fractured face glowing faintly red, fissures spreading like molten cracks. Daniel gripped the wheel until his knuckles split, every instinct screaming to fight against the impossible. But how do you drive when there is no road? Time didn't behave right in the drop. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes into something unmeasurable. Daniel's stomach should have lurched, but instead he felt as though he were suspended, caught between falling and floating. Outside the cab, shards of broken road drifted with him, chunks of asphalt and rebar tumbling into nothing. In one, Daniel swore he saw tire marks, his tire marks, etched in patterns that didn't make sense, as though he had driven this road before, over and over. The thought made him sick. The figure finally moved, its long body twisting unnaturally in the seat to face him fully. Its cracked grin stretched wider, teeth glowing faintly like embers. "Now you see," it rasped, the sound echoing as if spoken from 100 mouths. Daniel tried to raise the crowbar again, but his arm was heavy, veins glowing black beneath his skin. The tool slipped from his grip and floated in the cab, weightless. The figure's hand reached across, pressing against his chest. It wasn't a strike. It was a claiming. His heartbeat staggered, faltering under its touch. Daniel thought of home, the faded flannel jacket on his chair, the cheap beer sweating on his nightstand, the truck keys always rattling in the dish by the door. Mundane, ordinary things. Things that suddenly seemed like treasures he'd never touch again. His eyes burned. He wanted to beg, to promise, to plead, but no words came. The figure leaned closer until its forehead nearly touched his, glowing fissures lighting the cab with a dim, hellish glow. "There is no going back," it whispered. "You left the road." The truck struck something solid, but there was no crash, no impact, just silence. Daniel blinked. The cab was still. The engine was dead. The dashboard lights flickered, then went out. He sat alone. The passenger seat was empty, the frost gone, the windshield clear. Through it stretched a narrow road beneath the weak glow of the moon. His truck was parked on the shoulder, tires resting on cracked asphalt he recognized. The forest loomed quiet and still, the world unchanged. But his hands shook violently on the wheel, veins black and faintly glowing beneath the skin. And in the distance, down the dark road ahead, two faint headlights flickered to life, moving toward him.